All right, so I think we should start off with a round of introductions. As you know, my name is Sarah Davidson, and I will be conducting the interview today. And I was the 2023-2024 Dr. Biliana Season Fellow with the Global Ocean Forum, and I led their efforts on the COP28 Virtual Ocean Pavilion, among other things. And currently, I am a project coordinator with Kearns and West, which is a US-based facilitation, mediation, strategic communication firm, where I focus mostly on marine, freshwater, and energy-related topics. But I'm also a member of the North American Working Group for the Citizen of the Ocean Project, which is a youth-led world forum supported by the EU, Nausicaa, World Ocean Network, and others, which is trying to tackle issues related to the Ocean Decade Challenges through a series of workshops and summits ahead of the UN Ocean Conference that will take place in June. And so then in addition to all this, I've continued my relationship with the Global Ocean Forum by volunteering to work with them on several of their ocean climate initiatives, such as this. So Whitney, would you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, wow, you've been busy. And thank you for all of that work. So my name is Whitney Berry. I'm a senior manager of climate policy at Ocean Conservancy. And my role is really focusing on any and all, both international and federal ocean climate policy. You know, I could go into the COP29 specifics, or I'll leave it there for now.
That's great. That's great. Thank you so much. So I'd like to just quickly give a brief background on the Virtual Ocean Pavilion and the purpose of this interview before we dive into it. And as you may know, the Virtual Ocean Pavilion is a free online platform that's dedicated to raising the visibility of the ocean and showcasing why the ocean matters in climate negotiations. It really aims to democratize the ocean at COPs and promote unity and inclusivity while also increasing knowledge, commitment, and action for the ocean climate nexus at key events like COP29. And it also did this at COP26, COP27, and COP28. So this is the fourth iteration of the Virtual Ocean Pavilion, and it's showing itself to be a key tool in increasing transparency and equitable access to climate discussions and information. And so as a part of that, the Virtual Ocean Pavilion aims to showcase a selection of interviews with party negotiators and key stakeholders, such as yourself, and gain a better insight on COP29, the discussion process, and the status, while also enabling individuals such as myself to directly engage with COP29. And so I think without further ado, we'll dive right in. So again, I'll thank you for taking the time for this interview. And I think it'd be really helpful if we could start off with an explanation for the youth and general public about where parties currently stand with negotiations. We're in week 2 of COP 29. So also, if there's any updates you could provide on major items relating to the ocean that party negotiators or key stakeholders are deciding on, and kind of how does the Ocean Conservancy fit into that process?
Yeah, for sure. And I'll kind of step back by saying, why specifically, I'm participating at COP29. And then I can dive into what we've been hearing for some of the negotiations. So specifically, my role at COP29 is to advance ocean-based climate solutions within the UNFCCC, to push for parties to include these crucial ocean climate solutions in their nationally determined contributions, also known as NDCs, which are due to be updated by February of 2025, and also to convene partners and parties on the ground to discuss shared ocean climate priorities and to make sure that the ocean is well represented in a space that is, very often land-centric. And lastly, in the kind of scene setting, I'll note that COP29 is taking place right on the heels of the CBD COP16 negotiations. And this is important because we need to see a greater integration between climate and biodiversity action. So in addition to our priorities that I mentioned before, Ocean Conservancy is also on the ground in Baku to reiterate that despite separate mandates, the Convention on Biological Diversity and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change can effectively collaborate and support alignment at the national level. So with that context going into COP29, and I'll acknowledge that I'm an NGO. I'm not representing government as party to the Paris Agreement, but we do work very, very closely with a lot of the negotiators and parties up on the ground in Baku. So I can speak more broadly about the negotiations at COP29. This year is known more generally as the Climate Finance COP because the major focus of this year's ongoing negotiations are on the NCQG, which is the New Collective Quantified Goal on Finance. And so that means that this year's negotiators, who are representing nearly 200 countries, they'll be working really hard to reach an agreement over the coming week on the explicit details of that negotiation for the NCQG, like how much money they can deliver every year, who pays, which is obviously a clear point of contention, what is actually counted as climate finance, since currently there's no shared definition, and who gets the money, how it's distributed, as well as some more technical and political discussions needed to advance those negotiations. And all of these points are still being negotiated in week two, with really one of the only agreements from parties being that there needs to be a new funding target by the end of this week, which is a lot of pressure. And as far as how that relates to the ocean, although there will unlikely be a cover text or any negotiation language that's specific to the ocean climate nexus, it's really important to remember that climate finance is ocean finance. So the ocean offers crucial solutions for both climate mitigation and adaptation, and the ocean is part of the solution to achieve the objectives of the Paris Agreement. And as such, it's necessary to increase the availability and access to funding while mobilizing new and additional financial flows for ocean-based solutions. And this can be achieved by adopting an ambitious new collective quantified goal at COP29. And therefore, we really hope that the negotiations are ambitious and successful in allocating more finance for global climate solutions, which, as I mentioned, include general ocean-based solutions.
That's great. I'll want to circle back on several of the things that you highlighted there, but I think first, and you were just starting to get to this, but can you expand a little bit more on what your expectations were coming into COP29, or I should say your organization, and what you might consider a success for the ocean among the COP29 outcomes? I know you touched on the fact that they're going to be largely finance-based, but if you could expand upon that just a little bit more, I think that would be valuable.
Yeah, for sure. Heading into COP29, we knew that it's going to be a lot smaller of a COP, and that the climate finance negotiations would be tricky, and there's a lot of sticking points amongst different countries. Not surprisingly, parties would have a hard time reaching consensus on the details of an NCQG, which has a lot of ramifications going forward. That being said, we don't have time to waste, and so we need an ambitious climate finance decision coming out of this COP to prevent further climate catastrophe. So ideally, a successful COP29 outcome for the ocean would be the adoption of a very ambitious new collective quantified goal for climate finance. As I mentioned, climate finance is ocean finance. And so if that number is large, if the climate finance decision coming out of COP29 is ambitious, then that opens doors for ocean-based climate solutions to have the finance needed to actually be implemented and included in countries' nationally determined contributions, which I mentioned are due to be updated in February. So that would be a great outcome for the ocean.
I agree, and here's hoping. So I'd
Yes.
like to build I'd like to build a little bit more on what you just were touching on at the end there. So I'm curious what you think, like how countries can be supported to increase their understanding of potential ocean solutions, and what can be done to promote those efforts to include ocean solutions into their NDCs and NAPs, especially as you mentioned, there's kind of a timely component with some updates due to happen. So again, how can countries be supported to increase their understanding of those solutions and hopefully integrate them into the NDCs and NAPs?
Yeah, lots of different opportunities. One way that comes to mind for countries to increase their understanding of potential ocean climate solutions is to actively participate in the annual ocean climate change dialogue that takes place at the subsidiary body for scientific and technical advice meetings, known as the SUBSTA. which is convened under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change every June. And the purpose of the Ocean Climate Change Dialogue is to provide a space for parties and non-party stakeholders to improve their understanding of ocean climate solutions and challenges, share knowledge and experiences, and identify how to strengthen synergies while considering how to strengthen mitigation and adaptation within the ocean climate nexus and within the UNFCCC. And I think another way that countries can be supported, including ocean climate solutions into their NDCs and NAPs, is obviously through climate finance. And that's obviously top of mind for me right now. But this is, why these negotiations are so important. If we look beyond negotiations, then I would add that countries can be supported through increased capacity and technical support provided by NGOs and non-party stakeholders. A lot of times country representatives are spread super thin and don't have the resources or the time to focus on ocean-based climate solution integration into NDCs and NAPs. And that's where, NGOs can really step up. And, for example, Ocean Conservancy has just released an NDC guidance tool at COP29, which is focused on sharing key metrics and targets and best examples for the inclusion and implementation of offshore renewable energy into nationally determined contributions. So this can serve countries as kind of a have-on-hand tool in their ocean-based solutions toolbox. And going forward, we're going to be releasing these NDC guidance tools for multiple ocean-based climate solutions. So I think that NGOs have a big role to play as well.
Certainly, and we'll have to include a link to that guidance tool in the description of this interview when we upload it. And thank you for your response there. You kind of you touched on quite a few different things. I really appreciate you discussing how countries can best leverage existing processes, outside of NDCs and NAPs. I think that was really valuable to highlight. But going back on how you introduced the ocean and climate change dialogue, I'm curious, in your opinion, how effective that dialogue is proving to be as a formal and regular forum for countries and stakeholders. I believe it's really there to try to exchange lessons learned, challenges faced, and opportunities for strengthening ocean-based mitigation and adaptation. And I've only participated in a small slice of it in my time as fellow with the Global Ocean Forum. So I'd be curious to just hearing more from you on your experience on how effective the dialogue is proving to be.
Yeah, great question. Very timely. And maybe I can start by saying that, the ocean climate change dialogue is still fairly nascent. The first dialogue was held in 2020 and took place online because of the pandemic. And building on the success of that first dialogue, the following year at COP26, parties decided to make the Ocean Climate Change Dialogue an annual meeting. And this decision, further anchored the ocean climate nexus within the UNFCCC and really encouraged parties to strengthen ocean-based climate action within the context of the existing bodies of the UNFCCC. And this step provided the necessary support towards really institutionalizing ocean climate action in international climate negotiations, which up until 2020, they hadn't been. There had not been an official space for the ocean to be discussed in the UNFCCC. And, going back, the first annual and actually in-person ocean climate change dialogue didn't take place until June of 2022. And at that following COP, which was COP27, parties then decided that future dialogues will be decided by two co-facilitators selected by parties who will be responsible for deciding the topics of the dialogue and conducting the dialogue, obviously in consultation with parties and non-party stakeholders, as well as being responsible for preparing the output, the informal summary report to be presented at the subsequent COPs. And right now at COP29, the first set of designated co-chairs of the dialogue are sharing the climate change dialogue informal summary report. They had an event earlier this week, and basically concluding their 2-year tenure as co-chairs. So all this to say, the Ocean Climate Change Dialogue is currently the only designated space for parties to discuss the ocean climate nexus within the UNFCCC. And it has become really the main entry point for fostering international cooperation to support the integration and implementation of ocean-based action for both mitigation and adaptation purposes. So you know, long-winded answer, yes. I think it's effective. I think it served a really great purpose. And however, like all things, I think there's still room for growth and opportunities to improve going forward. And I think we need to continue to work to make it more actionable with more focused topics that parties can really prepare for ahead of time. And right now, in some ways, the dialogue is kind of regarded as more of a stakeholders workshop with, somewhat limited attendance from delegates. And this is something that could be improved, particularly considering its potential to serve as this, forum to strengthen the capacity of climate negotiators on ocean-related issues and to, increase ownership of ocean-based action. So it's therefore necessary to make it more attractive for climate negotiators to engage in the political discussions about the challenges and opportunities of the ocean climate nexus. So yes, it's effective and there's room for growth.
Oh, that was wonderful. Thank you. And I just want to recognize that, earlier you touched on how following on the heels of COP16 regarding biodiversity, there were a lot of opportunities for synergy between that COP and COP29. And at the same time, there's value in having, I don't want to call them silos, but making sure that there is distinct space for the ocean at COP29. So there's value in making sure there's synergy across COPs and across topics, but also making sure that you're holding space for the ocean as at a place that, as you've mentioned, has historically been more land focused is very important and effective in that own right. But going back to how you had earlier talked about, how this COP29 is really following on the heels of COP16, I want to ask you, how can we incentivize nature-based solutions? We recognize that the climate and biodiversity crises, they're deeply intertwined. So what strategies and mechanisms, could we explore to close this ocean finance gap? And what do you think might be contributing to the lack of funding in nature-based solutions? I'm really curious to hear your thoughts there and if you have any recommendations on how to increase funding.
Yeah. This is really important because we really need to see a greater integration between climate and biodiversity action. Operating in silos is not helping either cause. And, we often speak of the triple planetary crisis, and obviously biodiversity and climate change are two of those pillars. And this oftentimes can look like implementing nature-based solutions because if governments place ocean-based solutions and the health of our blue planet at the heart of climate biodiversity actions, then governments can benefit from climate change mitigation, adaptation, resilience, sustainable use, these no regrets solutions. Additionally, developing like a common long-term strategy to integrate the UN Convention on Biological Diversity and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change can enhance policy coherence and the alignment between national strategies, thus amplifying their impact. And these shared actions can be taken to protect the ocean, to help provide a critical blue thread is kind of how we've been communicating it. So this blue thread, as it were, that can weave across national plans and implementation, and we can help continue weaving that blue thread for the ocean by pushing countries to update not only their NDCs, but also their national biodiversity strategies and action plans. You'll hear them called, NBSAPs for the CBD. And, right now we're at a unique time because we're at a point in time where there are upcoming revisions due for both instruments, the NDCs and the NBSAPs. That doesn't usually align. And this provides a key opportunity to ensure that ocean-based measures contribute to a more integrated, biodiversity and climate governance structure. And so, yeah, just a unique opportunity. I agree that there needs to be the reserve space for the ocean and that some of the silos are necessary. But I think when it comes to climate and biodiversity action, they're both just so intertwined that more policy coherence is going to be really beneficial. And then kind of thinking about your the adaptation finance, and I apologize, you also asked about was it nature-based solutions? I apologize.
No, it's fine. I kind of threw a lot at you. So the question as it started was how could we incentivize nature-based solutions? And then I asked about strategies and mechanisms for closing this ocean finance gap. And I
Mhm.
closed with asking you what you thought might be contributing to the lack of funding in nature-based solutions and what you might recommend to increase funding.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, hopefully this question is moot after COP29
Hmm.
concludes,
Yeah.
since adaptation finance is a huge part of the negotiation focus for the NCQG, which encompasses both climate and mitigation and adaptation finance. So I'll stay tentatively hopeful.
Hmm.
And climate finance is ocean finance. I'll say it again. So ongoing negotiations and an ambitious financial outcome for COP29 is really crucial for closing that adaptation finance gap. As far as why the lack of funding for nature-based solutions and in that, I don't know. I think that there's a number of reasons. We've seen obviously that ocean solutions in general are typically the least funded. So Sustainable Development Goal 14, which is life below water, is the least funded SDG currently.
Hmm.
And I think that in a lot of ways, um, the cops are focused on, mitigation exclusively. And, I
Hmm.
think pushing the adaptation and nature-based solutions has always kind of been something that the ocean community has taken very seriously. But maybe there's not quite as many actors pushing for that.
Hmm.
I think that sometimes the science is lacking or a little bit behind. And so when you're talking about mitigation solutions at something like a COP, I think that sometimes nature-based solutions get left behind given the lack of science for accounting for some of those measures.
Hmm.
Um, and then, just ocean more generally, I think that people don't typically tend to live on the ocean, even though, you and I very well know that it's a blue planet, it's mostly ocean, I still
Hmm.
think that ocean solutions are not necessarily where people's mind go when we're
Sure.
talking about combating the climate crisis.
Sure. Well, thank you for that. That was a long question on my part, and you responded to it very, very well. I appreciate how you articulated all the different points. So now I'd like to zoom just a little bit out. We have just a couple more minutes here, so I'll just give you one or two more questions. And this is different than what we were talking about before, but I'm curious if you can speak to how you will ensure that your efforts, or I should say that the efforts of the Ocean Conservancy, to incorporate ocean-based solutions will include Indigenous peoples and local communities, and if that's something that is possible for your organization, to ensure or to work towards, because it's important to make sure that all communities, all peoples can have benefits from ocean climate solutions and make sure they're being equitably distributed. So is that something that you can speak to just a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to put my foot in my mouth because this isn't something that I particularly work on, but it is something that Ocean Conservancy prioritizes. And we have an ocean justice actual program that it works primarily at the federal level, so in the United States. But it is a program that touches everything that we do at Ocean Conservancy. And so obviously our international climate policy strives to include all of the ocean justice, uh, I'll say, priorities. But what I think also in this context that we've been talking about, in a lot of ways, this comes down to the countries and local governments that are tasked with implementing the ocean-based climate solutions that we're advocating for. And like I said, I'll kind of refrain from speaking to this question because it's not my expertise, but I will just say that any and all ocean-based climate solutions that we are advocating for should be implemented by government in an equitable and just way that includes Indigenous peoples and local communities in the planning, implementation, and the benefit sharing process. So definitely a crucial piece of the work that we do, and I just don't feel qualified to talk about it.
Absolutely. No, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I just
No.
know that the Conservancy does have a pretty robust program on
Mhm.
that note. So that was why I mentioned it.
Yes.
But I'll maybe have us conclude with just one final question, super easy question. If you have one key recommendation for promoting ocean climate action, what would it be and why? So again, one key recommendation for promoting ocean climate action, what would it be and why?
Mm, it is a straightforward question. It's just there's so much that I think needs to be done. Um, I'll I'll say education, I think, is one of the biggest pieces. As we discussed, obviously, ocean solutions are often underfunded, not represented as well. And the ocean community is very, very strong. And I think we work really well together of amplifying these solutions. But it's hard to not mention coming off of the US presidential election that one of my biggest recommendations right now for promoting ocean climate action is, for people to elect officials who understand the significance of the climate crisis and are willing to take ambitious action now when it's needed, including through the implementation of crucial ocean-based climate solutions. So, education of the public to make sure that our society going forward prioritizes what needs to be prioritized.
Certainly a very timely recommendation. Thank you for that. And Whitney, before we wrap up, do you have any further comments or questions that you'd like to ask?
Um, no, no questions. This has been wonderful. I do, thinking about what the actual COP negotiation focus is for right now, I feel like I could have provided a bit more context for some of what's going on behind the scenes. And so if there is any other details, feel free to, pepper me with a couple more questions. But I think that as far as, the as the COP29 finance negotiations advance, one of the sticking points is that there needs to be collaboration and agreement amongst the donor countries, which
Mhm.
are larger, wealthier nations like the EU and Canada and the US, and as well as the developing countries who would, be receiving that climate finance. And there's some political agendas, just like speaking to inform, those who might not be quite as aware with this
Please,
particular
please.
negotiation. Yeah. So there's some political agendas behind the scenes that are also holding some of the negotiations back.
Yep.
And so I think, for example, the existing list of donor countries would like to see China and the Gulf states, such as Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, kind of step forward with financial pledges because they're financially capable of contributing climate finance, but these countries are not technically part of the official list of donor groups under the terms of the 1992 UN Climate
Mhm.
Treaty. And so, therefore, existing donors are being asked to carry more of that financial responsibility. And so there needs to be more collaboration agreement amongst the list of donor parties as well. And
Mhm.
so I just think that in terms of trying to understand these negotiations and where some of the sticking points are, there's a lot of behind the scenes politics that are maybe
Yeah.
not so upfront. And I think that's just kind of helpful context.
Oh, it's super helpful. And I apologize if I didn't capture some of the points that you'd like to further expand upon with my questions. We do have a little bit more time. And I just think that your last comment was super helpful because it's very easy to sit behind a screen, hitting refresh, being upset why progress isn't happening. And you might be on the ground also upset why progress isn't happening, but at least you're a little bit more clued in to those machinations that are happening, as you said, behind the scenes. So I'll leave a little bit more space if you have any other closing comments or things that you'd like to highlight. Otherwise, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much. I nothing else, and maybe I'll leave us on like a little bit of a positive note is
Sure.
we do work really closely, Ocean Conservancy works very closely with a group of parties called the Friends of Ocean and Climate. And this
Yeah.
is a group of champion parties that are for the ocean, and they work really hard at all of these UNFCCC events to prioritize ocean-based climate solutions and make sure that the ocean is included. And even though these negotiations, are not ocean centric and they're not really a great
Mhm.
opportunity to push anything. One of the takeaways is that parties are so hopeful for an ambitious NCQG outcome, that they didn't want to tack on any other language that might slow the process or,
Hmm.
derail the negotiations that are already happening. And so just because there's no specific text about the ocean, it doesn't mean that that is not happening behind the scenes as well.
Sure.
And so this group of the Friends of the Ocean Climate, they actually are working on a statement right now that they're going to read in plenary that's talking about the importance of ocean-based climate solutions and how climate finance is ocean finance and will help, meet some of those goals. So for all of us ocean lovers who might be feeling like a little bit, disinterested in this COP, it's still moving forward, and there's a lot of people working really hard.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for that closing comment. And thank you for your time today. I really appreciated the opportunity to interview you. And, I'm not on the ground at COP, and I know that you aren't as well. So it's still really valuable to be able to connect and talk about it like this. So I'll just say thank you again. And with that, we can consider the interview complete.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I hope to see you at some of the events, one of the projects that you're working on in the future.
Sure.